had yesterday. We continue with panel discussions throughout the week, running from Monday all the way through Friday. Even as the legal awareness, the clinics happen at the Supreme Court, in the Milimani Law Courts, as well as High Courts and the branches all over the country. Ladies and gentlemen, we are pleased to bring to you our panel for today. The discussion of the theme will be children's rights, perspective in the current context of the rise in teenage pregnancies and rights of children in conflict with the law. And we are privileged today to have discussants, among them Honorable Millie Othiambo Mobona. She needs no introduction. However, the little I know about her is that she's very, very vocal matters children, both in Parliament. And she has, among others, developed a bill, ART. I'm sure she'll be speaking about that. She's a member of Parliament for Suba North. We also have Miss Emma Muma. Miss Emma Muma works with the judiciary. She also sits in the Child Law Practitioners Committee of the Law Society of Kenya. We also have Miss Maureen Mwandime from the Kenya National Human Rights Commission. And we have Miss Victoria Mudhamwa from Rose Banya and Company Advocates. Our moderators for the day will be Kabata Mwaura. Again, he needs no introduction. And Brian Ondongo. Brian Ondongo will be joining us in a bit. We also have indication that we anticipate Honorable Miss Esther Pasaris will be joining us a little later, also to discuss on the same agenda. So ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you officially to day 2 of our panel, and we anticipate that we're going to have a good time. We welcome you to send in your questions through our channels on Twitter, on YouTube, on Facebook, and even those our members joining us on Zoom, we'll be sure to share them with the panelists as the conversation goes. Allow me to say a prayer and we can have the day start. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we want to thank you, we want to bless your name. Thank you for granting us the grace to do what God you called us to do. And as we continue with the Legal Awareness Week, we don't want to depend on our own energy and ability. We trust that your direction, we trust that your clarity of idea, we trust that your strength will enable us to do that which we want to do for today. So we ask you to be with us as we begin this day, through the activities of the day, as we have our panel discussions, as we have our conversations going on in the legal awareness clinics all throughout the country. We ask that, God, you can be part and parcel of this, oh God. And Father, even as we do this, we ask that, God, you allow our members also to participate and also to learn, even as we endeavor to be better advocates, not only to ourselves, but also to the citizens from whom we saw an oath to protect and defend. Father, we thank you because you grant us all that we have prayed through our Savior and your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen and amen. So, karibu sana Kabata, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geshwe, for the wonderful introduction. Welcome members to this second day of the Legal Awareness Week. Karibu sana Honorable Millie Mabona and the other participants, panelists, Maureen Mwandime, Emma Muma, and the last one is Mrs. Victoria Mudhama. So let's, a lot of apologies for starting late. The traffic, the usual traffic in Nairobi and the logistical issues that followed there, then necessitated that we start late. My apologies for this to the members and the panelists. So let's kick it off with an observation on the rights of the child and a specific target towards the rights of a child who finds himself or herself within the wrong side of the law, that is those who are subject to the law. I'll kick it off with a question to Honorable Millie. This is not a legislative issue per se, but rather you give us your own insights into it, seeing that you started off quite at an early stage in your life engaging with children, so that being a founder of Cradle, could you give us an insight into what you think the problem is and the solution towards teen pregnancies?
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Law Society of Kenya, for focusing on the rights of the child, which is very dear to me. I've worked a lot on the issues of children's rights, not just from the cradle, but from when I was little, because my mother worked in this sector. And so I saw her working around issues of children's rights for a very long time. And before I go even to the legal issues, I want to say that we are facing unprecedented challenges as a country, not only as a country, but as a world in general. I was looking recently at a publication that has been done by the Cradle on the challenges that children are facing during the pandemic. And I think we all know that we're already facing a crisis before the pandemic. But the pandemic has even made it even more difficult because suddenly we are having children at home for many months, which parents are not used to. But it has spotlighted one of the things that as a society we have never taken cognizance of. That our children have actually been almost completely out of the hands of parents. That those who have been parenting our children are teachers and other caregivers. The teachers spend more time with our children. The teachers are the ones who give values and directions to our children on a day-to-day basis. If we're talking about the public schools are overwhelmed because of the education system, which is, some of the policy around free education would be considered maybe a double-edged sword because it allows many more children to access schools. But because we did not then put into place measures to accommodate these children, our teachers are completely overwhelmed, that they are not able to give the sort of moral guidance and direction that our children need. But beyond that now, we then find ourselves in a situation that the children are bounced back to the parents who have completely lost the idea about what parenting is really about. But we also have a country that is at a crossroads, especially with digital invasion, with the global revolution of digitization. Then we have ourselves in a situation that our children are being parented by everyone. You will find that your child is being parented by a pedophile that she has met online. So as much as you may want to give your child this direction, there's somebody else that is guiding your child in other directions. And it therefore means that as a country and as a nation, we must rethink about our roles as parents and how we must engage our children. There are parents who, because they are busy, they compensate by enabling their children to get anything they want, even when they are not ready. Like, for instance, some parents will give their children phones, they'll enable them to access technology, and the children are much, much more too informed than we even imagine. We have controls personally. I have controls with the children I live with, whether it's my nieces or grandchildren. I have a lot of control and say. Yet despite that, you still find that they have a lot more information than we think they know. Like recently, 8-year-old girl in my household, when we were discussing, because we do Bible study and we were having a discussion, and we normally have very candid discussions around different issues. So the issue came up of homosexuality, and she's 8 years, and she asks us, what is homosexuality? And then each of us was wondering, so how do you start telling her what homosexuality is? So as we are struggling to explain the words, and I gave one of the younger girls who probably knows the best language to tell her, one of my nieces who is 22, and as she was explaining what homosexuality is, then the 8-year-old goes, you mean gay? So all along she knew. We are struggling to explain to her what she knows all along. And that means that the children are way ahead of us. And unless we do catch up as parents, then we're going to have a lost generation. We are also having parenting skills for my generation with a totally different generation, a digital generation, and we want to parent them with the generation of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 50s and people who are 40s. So we must know that we are talking of Generation Z, Generation Y, and I don't know which other generation. It's no longer even millennial. Millennial is now even the new old. Yes, so we have the Gen Z. So we're having we must reconfigure how we are dealing with these young people. You are talking to young people who you are educating them. And I remember part of the candid discussions we were having with my team of young girls. And then they told me, you know what, Auntie, you are having these discussions a bit late in the day. These things you are telling us are kind of a bit archaic. You should start them, much earlier. So how early is early? Maybe we need to start talking to our kids about boy-girl relationships at 4. And I would want to again put the challenge to our religious community, that when the religious community hears the words reproduction, they think reproduction is about telling kids to have sex. I know there are people who have gone completely way out on the issue of reproduction, but I think if we close our ears like the ostrich burying the hand in the sand, these problems will not go away. We must be able to tell our kids about their body parts. We must be able to tell them what sex is and when and how and with whom and everything about sex. We cannot pretend that they will somehow switch some button and know about sex. And if we think that that will happen, then they will indeed switch some button and know about sex from somebody else, not from us. And therefore, for me as a country, we must start having very candid discussions about sex and our children. I used to be a very strong opponent of sex education in school. I am a very strong proponent now of sex education in school. And when we talk about sex education in school, we are not saying that we should tell our children to have sex. It means we are talking candidly to our kids. Because I talk to 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and they're already having sex with each other. So when are you talking to them? As I said earlier, my niece told me, when you're talking about to 15-year-olds now, you are already too late in your discussion. So maybe before I get into the law, I would want to say that as a country, we must reboot and we must restart our social thinking and psyche. We must have a paradigm shift in the way we deal with young people.
Thank you so much for that insight. Perhaps a follow-up onto it and also to expect some feedback from the other panelists, Maureen Mwadime and Emma Muma. Is it then a time that in having that candid discussion, we should discuss the iniquity in attempting to define an age of consent, so that if we are being other and being alive to the fact that young people are engaging or are exposed to sexual reproductivity at a young age, then is it a ripe time to discuss about the age of consent so that to expose them to further dynamics like reproductive health at a later stage?
Thanks. I think for me, sometimes I listen to us having discussions about having, like there are people who have been proposing that maybe this is a time to lower the age of consent in sexual matters. And for me, the challenge will be if we open up the debate about lowering the age of consent in sexual matters, and I'm already telling you that there are 8-year-olds having sex with each other, then how low will we go? Will we say that now we lower it to 6 years? I don't think it's about lowering the age of consent. The challenge we are facing is young people having sex with each other. And the Sexual Offences Act right now criminalizes young people having sex with each other. So it depends on which parent comes forward before the other. And on this one, there is a gender discrimination against the boy child, that people always presumes that the girl child is sort of a victim in a boy-girl relationship where people have sex. So if a girl has, say, a 17-year-old girl has sex with a 17-year-old boy, then the parents of the girl will go and accuse the boy of defilement. And for me, I think what we need to do is to amend the Sexual Offences Act to acknowledge that there are children having sex with each other and not to encourage them to have sex with each other, but not to treat it as a crime, but to treat it as children in need of care and protection under the Children Act. And children in need of care and protection are children that need psychosocial support. They don't need to be charged with criminal offense. Nonetheless, even in that case, I would propose that there needs to be an age limit, even where children are engaging with children, because children are anybody below 18 years under the Children Act. So for me, if it is a 16-year-old having sex with a 17-year-old, then those are children that need counseling. They need psychosocial support under the Children Act. But what about if it is a 17-year-old who is also a child, having sex with an 8-year-old who is a child? That is a no-no. So for me, maybe we should put a maximum of 2 years difference, even if we wanted to sort of open the space about children having sex with children, which should not be encouraged, but which should be treated as children in need of care and protection under the Children Act, not as a criminal offense. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that, Honorable Lily. Maureen Modime, I don't know whether you're still on. Maureen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Maureen.
Okay, yes. Just go ahead, please.
Didn't you get the discussion? What we are saying, Maureen. We lost Maureen.
Yes, proceed.
Were you following, or your network had a problem? I can repeat. What we are saying, what we are saying is we are following the discussion around teen pregnancy, and we are looking at the social revolution mechanisms that that inform this discussion. So one of the pointers that we are trying to highlight is whether there is a need to lower the age of consent, or rather introduce, as Honorable Millie Mabona has incited, introduce the acceptable convenience clauses, the sort of Romeo and Juliet clauses that permit age limits like 17 and 16 within like 2 years difference, which is acceptable. So within the Commission's mandate, perhaps you could give us an insight whether you have some research into it within your monitoring framework on how this can be dealt with. It's an open dialogue. Do not feel restricted.
Yes, thank you so much, first of all, for the invitation. And good morning to all the panelists and the participants. I followed the conversations that came earlier, and I am totally in agreement with Honorable Millie's perspective. And the main reason, as she had said, lowering the age limit or lowering the age of consent is going to be a slippery slope. Because then again, if we are to set it at 16, just at 17, just as she said, and we are definitely going to have a further conversation on this in years to come if we have other age groups indulging in this same practice. So it is a little bit defeatist for us to be lowering the age of consent. However, not burying our heads in the sand, again echoing what Honorable Millie has said, information is available to each and every person, including our own children, at the click of a button. So what we need to be asking ourselves is how best can we ensure that the children get the right information? And that is where I believe the issues to do with sexual reproductive health education is very important when it comes to even the minors as well. Although we have a lot of, we have the tag, the tag of war between those who would want the education introduced and those who would want the STEM to not necessarily be introduced in schools. The reason being, the saying, well, let children be children. But this is happening. We need to be alive to the fact that we have children that will require this information and the right information at that. So in terms of the age of consent, I have this, we should engage in conversations on how to ensure that children access the right information to make informed choices, as opposed to lowering the age of consent to allow them to be able to engage in these particular activities. Hello?
We are still getting you.
Hey, hello. Yes, I believe that is it from my end. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Maureen. A follow-up question after Emma makes her comment. Don't you find it fascinating, Maureen, that the teen pregnancy issue, in fact, at a larger majority affects those who are from humble backgrounds? Now, I use the word humble, however, it means those whose backgrounds are impoverished. So that is it that those who come from perhaps middle class families or the wealthy families, aren't they challenged by these issues, or is it that they have access to safe reproductive health infrastructure? You may respond to it after Emma has made her incitement.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me today. First of all, I totally agree. Like, I feel like Honorable Millie and myself are literally speaking from the same script. In that, I totally agree with what she says. First of all, I don't think it would be advisable to reduce the age of consent. When we're talking about reproductive health and the age of consent, what I've learned when most often than not you're dealing with parliamentarians, you'd rather have them separate as opposed to putting it's always brought an issue. So I feel like we need the age of consent discussion to be had separately from the whole reproductive health discussion. Because my thoughts are the age of consent discussion has always been an issue. It's brought an uproar and the religious leaders and all that, and now we are having this reproductive health. I feel like we need to probably just tweak it a little and see how we can tread. Because I agree with the whole idea of having sex education in schools, and to some extent, we cannot bury our heads in the sand and assume that our children are not having sex. They are having sex. There's a lot of sites on social media, there's a lot of sites that, and it's become like the norm. It's the normal thing that's happening right now because of social media and technology, and we cannot deny that. So I think even as we probably approach even maybe the religious leaders and we want to have this discussion, we cannot hide, it is there, and even they also have kids, so they might want to say that it is not the right thing, it is not something that we should be exposing our children to, but the children are already exposed to that. then I feel like we're also living in a rotten society. So there's also the rise in the teenage pregnancies um, could also be, I could say, like there's a lot of defilement. There's like so much going on in our societies, like a lot of defilement, especially in families and in very, like the kids are being defiled mostly by the people they know. And then you see the thing is they try and hide it, like a lot of kangaroo courts just to at least hush this, and families dealing with it by themselves and just paying each other up. So that's also another reason for this increase in teenage sex. And just what Maura just mentioned about most of the kids who are getting pregnant are kids from this background. And I'm thinking, yeah, just a month or two ago, my cleaning lady was telling me that a girl got pregnant, and the girl was 5 months pregnant, and this was in August. And what happened was the boy gave the girl a pill to swallow, and at night, of course, the girl started bleeding, and it became really bad. And by the time she was telling me, I think they took the girl, she was fine, she was cleaned. But now you see her next action was to go to the police and report this boy and say that it's the boy who actually, of course she says rape, but defiled her girl, and that's, you see, so, and when you speak to her girl is like, no, but this is my boyfriend, and they'll tell you that for sure. And we've had cases in court where probably the mother, of course, as it said, the mother will go to the police station because her daughter is pregnant. And what happens is the boy is the one who is charged. And when this boy is charged and they're taken to court and they're trying to get the evidence out of this girl, and the girl says, no, I will not say that he raped me or he defiled me because we were actually having a relationship. So they had sex, and I would say agreed sex. It's not, we can't say consensual sex because they're young and they cannot consent, but they had sex as they were in a relationship, so they had sex. And the magistrate sits and she's like, okay, fine. How am I supposed to convict somebody, and yet the victim says that it was actually consensual, quote unquote, you see? So I feel like even the judgment by Justice Omondi was actually very, very good. It was quite a reprieve for the boy child, actually, because you realize most of our facilities had so many boys who had just been accused, and probably some have actually been accused correctly, but others, for sure, they were just having relationships, just as teenagers are having relationships, and they had sex and something happened, you know? And when we talk about this, I feel like this sex education topic is very, very timely. We'd rather have this education than having our kids going to the internet and getting contraceptives and information about contraceptives on their own without any guidance, you know. Like then they probably will not even ask you, and they'll probably even send somebody to the chemist to buy it for them just so that they use it, and then the next thing you know, it's backfired, and the next thing, of course, somebody's pregnant. So I feel that these are discussions that really need to be had. I feel that the bill is actually very, very timely. The issue of consent or reducing the age of consent, I still do not agree. A child is a child. Even if that child is having sex, that does not mean that it is not a crime to have sex, actually. And I feel that we should stop criminalizing sex. Sex is not a crime. Let's stop criminalizing sex. Sex is something that can actually be spoken about, and let probably, if a child is already sexually active, speak to them, and let's see how we can probably avoid. I'm not encouraging sex, however, they're already having it. So we might as well move to the other side and start having these conversations. So one of the things that actually applaud is the judgment that came to really save the boy child, in that when they have sex, when these teenagers are having sex, agreed sex, like they were in a relationship, I feel that they defile each other. And as Heshimiwa was saying, these are not people who should go through the justice system. These are people who need psychosocial support. They need to be talked to, they need to be counseled, because they need to understand what they're doing, you know. They're young, they probably need also to be guided. I mean, they decide, because I know people who are very young and they'll tell you they have sex, and especially, like, let's look at countries in the US. I was very shocked a couple of years back when a very young cousin of mine was telling me she's very excited to get to 14 years old because her mom is going to take her to buy contraceptives. Like, that's when she's allowed to use contraceptives. And you see, now the thing is, like, now she's about my age right now, and I mean, that's not a discussion I would have had with my parents. But when I look at some of the people who are my age who probably were not able to have such information, and even to speak to their parents on such issues, you see, these are things that we really need to speak about right now. Let's not hide and let's not lie to ourselves that it's not happening. Our generation was very different from the generation that is right now. I sit down with my nieces and nephews, and some of the things they tell me, and I sit back, I'm like, okay, where did you even learn that? You see, even the videos that they're watching, the apps they're in, like, I mean, it's a whole new level. So can we just stop pretending that this is not happening? And I think this is the time to actually come out boldly and speak about it. And I know it's going to be, I know, but at least we have somebody who's Millie is very, very, she's going to do that very well for us, because I feel like the religious leaders will come and like it will be a fight. But I know she's able. She's very, she's properly empowered, and I feel like she'll bring out that discussion very well. That's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Emma. As we move on to Victoria Mudhama, Emma, just hold on to this question. Are there alternatives that now seems that seemingly that you are from the judiciary? Are there alternatives that now apply to children who find themselves in conflict with the law that exempt them from their liberty? That is, alternatives to imprisonment. Hold on to that question as we move to Victoria Mudhama. Victoria, good morning. Victoria. Good morning, Victoria. How are you? I hope you've been following our discussion this morning.
Yes, I have. I've been listening.
Yeah, so we have not moved into the second part of children in conflict with the law, but you can, it's an open discussion. Don't feel limited. We are now expounding on the reasonable substance that is beneath the access to information for children, especially information that touches on their reproductive health and any information that then affects their decision to make choices that touch on their reproductivity. So please don't feel limited. Just continue with, or rather give us your opinion into the discussion.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. I agree with what the speakers before me have said, to a large extent. And I think we need to first ask ourselves why we have seen such an increase in teenage pregnancies. Before we can go to how to solve it, I think the first question we need to answer is the why. So that if we're talking about information to children, if we say that we are seeing an increase in teenage pregnancies because there's a gap in sexual education, then we can start saying that they need more information. But there could be other factors as well. Why did we see such an increase during the COVID-19 period? Is it because there was no sex education? Perhaps, but perhaps not. I think there are other factors that contribute. And even before we talk about lowering the age of consent, will that really get to the root of the problem? Have we really understood why teenagers engage in these pregnancies before we can actually get to the root of the problem? And I think sex education could be one, but it cannot be one shoe fits size all. Like, there has to be a multi-facet approach. There are some, yes, who do not have the education, and giving them the sexual education will help. There are some who are ignorant, but you've asked a very interesting question. Why is it that we see this mostly in people who come from humble backgrounds, as opposed to the middle class versus the wealthy? That's another area where we can explore the why. Is it because there is more economic pressure in the humble backgrounds? Is it that teenagers are lured by economic incentives and thus end up getting pregnant? Is it peer pressure? Is it, I believe Honorable Mili also mentioned this, that parents are not there as much to give the guidance that their children need. So I think, yes, sex education is one way of solving it, but we need to cater for everyone. Not every teenager engages in pregnancy, in sexual activities because they do not have the education. The people there's a lot of access right now, online access. A teenager can get all the education they need, but is that enough? Why exactly are they doing this? Is it something that we can solve up in addition to the sexual education that we can offer?
Oh, thank you so much. Just another insight. How are young people involved in this decision making? Because then, if it touches and affects their livelihoods, how do their voices get heard? Maybe this is a random question to all the panelists. How do their voices get heard? Maybe we can start with Honorable Mili because she's here.
Okay, thanks. Before I get into how do we get children's voices to be heard, maybe one of the things that I just want to comment on the issue of lowering the age of consent that I didn't mention before is that if you actually hear the people who are strongly for lowering the age of consent, it is for totally different reasons. They are older men who think that a person who is 17 and 16 and 15 are old enough to engage in sex, not with young people, but with older men. So if you have a child, if you have a niece, or you have a daughter who is around, say, 15, 16, 17, and below the age of consent, will you be comfortable with your daughter having sex with a man who is 60 or 70 years? Because that's, in a sense, what you're talking about. So there must be an age that we say, or that would guide us. And for me, if somebody is old enough to have an ID, then that probably should be the operating age. Because otherwise we'll be exposing our children to circumstances we didn't intend, which is exploitation by older men. And I think maybe another thing that I just wanted to talk about is when we talk about sex education in schools, for instance, then we should be talking about age-appropriate sex education. And sometimes I like giving very clear examples so that we know what we're talking about. Like, if you listen to children in kindergarten and in class 1, they normally have rhymes and songs as a means of education. What if we just sing for them a song, these are my private parts? No one should touch them, no one should play with them, no one should see them. So that our children start knowing what their private parts are very clearly and knowing that nobody should play with them. I don't see why, for instance, a child will be opposed to us teaching children about what their private parts are and that nobody should play about them. But then also for me, it is the issue about as they grow slightly older, that we need to teach our children about boundaries, what is the right touch. That even if I'm engaging, even familiar, what is the right touch and what is not the right touch. And when you have boundaries, because there must be a point that you have boundaries. If you have a father who, when the daughter is younger, will carry the daughter on his lap, play with the girl, kiss the girl, when you do that when your daughter is 16 years, of course you're not going to do that. So as the kids grow, we must be giving them appropriate information, even when it entails a family, what should and should not, be involved in. And then a lot of girls don't even know about situations where they put themselves in danger. Like a lot of girls get violated when they go into homes which they think are fairly safe. Like one of the things that we saw during this corona period that I was being told in my constituency, that parents have engaged their young girls in invoking. And they say that sometimes you find a girl has gone to sell something in a house and you find a man who is partially naked, only tying a towel around their waist, and they tell the girl, just drop whatever you have on the table. We need to tell our girls, you can't drop whatever you are carrying on the table with a man carrying a towel around his waist. And not only that, where there's only a man in the house, don't get into that house. Even if it means you are not going to serve, don't serve. And another issue which I'm not going to give an answer to, but it's a question that we must start engaging with as a country, is what do you do when your child is already sexually active? Do you kill them? Do you talk to them? What do you do when your child is already sexually active? Because a lot of them are already sexually active. How do we want to engage with our girls and boys who are already sexually active? Or do we shout at them? And is that going to work? So we must start having the conversations where our children, we know are already sexually active, and instead of pretending and shouting and screaming and wishing that it will go away, but they are sexually active. So I will not, I'll leave that as a rhetorical question, what do we do? And now getting back to how do we get children's voices? I have done this work for many years as an advocate for children. And I can tell you that children are more perceptive than you actually imagine. Just like the way I gave you an example of my 8-year-old grannies, who, as I'm struggling to explain to her what homosexuality is, she tells me, you mean gay? She already knows. And when you talk to children, sometimes they have their own way of expressing what they have, but they for sure know what they're talking about. And they are not, immune to what is going on in society. They know it and they can voice it even much better than you. And I'll give you an example one time when I was still working at the cradle. And we used to deal a lot with child participation. Even in the constitution making process, we involve the children. And they give you their perspective, but then now you translate it into legal language. And I remember one time we gave them this task and we said that each group was marooned in a jungle, and they had to find a way to survive. And we told them, everybody had to be creative in the way they are going to survive. So one group came back and said, they killed a bird and they cooked the bird. So we told them, but you didn't have anything in your hands. How did you kill the bird and cook with the bird? And we actually had children from different ethnic communities. And this group said that it was a mixed group, and they said, well, you have a Ghanaian in our midst. He threw a stone at the bird and killed the bird. What is that kid telling you? That ethnicity is a big problem in the country. They don't need to voice it to you, that ethnicity. How did a young kid understand that he was throw stones to kill birds? And we also had very different ideology that seemed to, have or confirm what we as adults say about other tribes. Others were saying how they ran and stole something because they had a Kikuyu in their midst. How do you, and it kind of challenges you what messaging we give our young people. But sometimes they shock us into reality, and we need to listen to them. Even during the post-election violence, one of my girls came back from school, and she told me, auntie, people are saying really terrible things about you, and she was crying. So I said, where did you hear people saying terrible things about me? And she said, in my school, my desk mate had her father talking very nasty things about you. They are best friends. But we as parents are saying very nasty things about each other. And that is why we must have conversations with each other. Very recently, another time, one of my nieces, she started working and all that. And at one point, thieves broke into her house. She was sharing a room with this lady who is a Kalenjin. And we had to send rescue in the middle of the night and brought them, and this Kalenjin girl came and stayed with us for a while. I don't know, I didn't know who her parents were. But guess what? She made me, my niece, and their daughter made me get to know the parents. And perhaps we are even at very different political angles. So there's a lot that we can learn from younger people about the way we are misbehaving as older persons. And we currently have a public participation, actually 3 bills on public participation before Parliament. And they've been shared. One is by a community member, I think one is by Honorable Chris Romano, and another one I think is by Senator Amos Wako. So they've been shelved so that they can be harmonized. But one of the things that we have already proposed in the public participation bill is that we must also hear children's voices when we are dealing with public participation, because children also bring a lot to the table, and in very fresh perspectives that adults are not able to do. Our minds are already too clouded with biases, and I think children can bring to us fresher perspectives if we institutionalize child participation in the law. So I personally would ensure that should the public participation bill pass, that will infuse the issue of child participation. I know that there were a lot of issues with the bill itself. There are members who thought they did not want public participation as a bill. I could tell that there was some level of opposition. So I don't know whether it will pass, but should it pass, I will ensure that the issue of child participation, at least I'll put my voice very strongly towards it. So yeah, that's what I can say about child participation.
Thank you so much. Maureen, just 1 minute each. Maureen, Victoria, and Emma.
Okay, thank you, Maura.
1 minute each.
Okay, so picking up from where Honorable Mini has left it, we have a very good policy on adolescent sexual and reproductive health policy, and I believe what is lacking with regards to this policy is basically the implementation aspect or the operationalization aspect, because aspects of public participation, for instance, are well covered under that particular policy. Now, on what you had mentioned about children from humble backgrounds, I totally agree with you. And the main reason for this is because children from these specific backgrounds have heightened vulnerabilities. And we can also say that indeed they are socioeconomic victims, if we may put it that way. So all the venues or avenues that children from better backgrounds may have to be able to verify information, for instance, this particular group of children will not necessarily have the same. So the main avenue where these children will probably get the information, for instance, with regards to sexual and reproductive health information, will be from their fellow peers. Now, they lack avenues to corroborate such information, basically because they cannot sit down and talk to their parents, and well, they do not have the gadgets to be able to verify this information. And the other thing that we need to also highlight with regards to this vulnerable group of children is the access to healthcare facilities. And one of the panelists has mentioned about the heightened numbers, especially during the pandemic. I also agree with that to a very large extent. In a meeting that we were with the Ministry of Health recently, Ken Sechar was really perturbed by the information that came out from that particular meeting, mainly because healthcare facilities, especially the antenatal clinics that are not necessarily in towns, were reporting that pre-COVID they will get at least 2 visits from teenagers, or we can call them young mothers. But after the pandemic, mainly from March to June thereabouts, the numbers tripled, and to some extent even went further than the the ×3 number. So we had numbers coming from all the way from 2 to 30 in antenatal clinics. So that is really, really a worrying figure. Then the other thing is on food and financial security. We have children who engage in sex work to be able to provide for the families that they are in. Because, well, basically, for one reason, they are supposed to be the persons providing. Maybe they do not have a strong support system in terms of parents who actually take up the responsibility, or we have no support system at all. Mainly because the parents are deceased, or probably they are living in a community that does not necessarily reach out to them to be able to provide for their needs. So in such instances, you will see the child, the firstborn, for instance, who is a girl, engaging in sex work to be able to provide for the rest of the children who have been left behind. And how to capture youth voices. This I think I will also emphasize on the need to be able to operationalize the National Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health Policy. It's been there for quite a long time, since 2015. It's time that we take those bold steps to be able to implement the policy to address some of the issues that have kept recurring from 2015 to date. Thank you so much, Maura. Over to you.
Thank you, Maureen. We are joined with my co-moderator, Mr. Brian Odongo. The number of the panelists is also balanced by the number of the moderators in terms of gender. So over to you, Mr. Odongo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kabata. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please forgive me for walking into the session a bit late. And I'd like to acknowledge the presence of one of our sponsors, Mr. Boniface Gore from DG Solution. Equally, to thank and mention our convener, Ms. Day2 on account of which I would also like to let us know that the Public Interest Litigation Committee of the LSK is currently working on the Information and Educative and Communication Material, IAC, which will soon be out for our consumption. It will delve largely on the age of consent, access to contraceptive and sexual and reproductive health rights of children. So let's look out for that. As soon as it comes out, I trust it will enrich and further this discussion that we're having today. And on that note, allow me to loop into the discussion two issues: culture and urbanization on the one part, and secondly, the question of the child's right to be heard. A famous parliamentarian, perhaps being present here or not, once made the statement, and I'll attempt to translate as accurately as possible. The statement was in Luo, and it said that Jana that loosely translates to someone from the lake is not afraid of the nakedness of the other person. That parliamentarian is currently laughing. And with that statement, I want to introduce the question of culture, together with to address the question of urbanization. All the panelists and my co-hosts, Mr. Kabata, have correctly so mentioned the issue of access to information, and tied very closely there is the question of urbanization. The very last statistic that was done on the question of teen pregnancy had 11,795 cases in Nairobi, urbanization, and 6,686 in Kakamega, what Maura Kabata mentioned, impoverished communities. So it therefore means, at least I know as lawyers perhaps we're not statisticians, I'm very proud that I've said something about property, statisticians. But at least we are aware of the fact that by those two figures, those were the two highest counties in terms of teen pregnancy numbers in the country. Nairobi at 11,000, Kakamega at 6,000. For those of us who study international law, I trust you interacted with the issue of the ICRC, the International Federation of the Red Cross, which was established in 1893, if I'm not mistaken. And for a long time, they had struggled to run their programs effectively in the Middle East. And so they figured their biggest hurdle was culture. And so around about 1982, the International Federation of the Red Crescent then began. will loop in those who acceded to the faith Islam. And that way then the ICRC and the IFRC saw a large penetration of their services. Now that is drawing inference. Now let's come back to this question of teen pregnancy and child pregnancy. Is it that urbanization contributes, and this is open to all panelists, is it that urbanization contributes in terms of access to information and hence our children are exposed to things that otherwise those of us born in a different generation, X and Y, may not relate to as Gen Z would? Or in the converse, is it that, as in the case of Kakamega, parents are so busy trying to earn a better living for their children, maybe also the same case in urbanization, that there is no time to parent? Or is it that there are certain cultural influences? I trust we're all familiar with the phenomenon of disco matanga, which has been identified in several counties and particularly certain sub-counties. For instance, in Busia County, the question of disco matanga has been largely targeted as one of the sources. So perhaps as we done let's interact with that issue, then later on we'll introduce the question of every child's right to be heard. Perhaps we can start with the Honorable. Maybe she can get a chance to answer to her anecdote.
Thank you. Thank you also for saying that. I'd actually say that in reference to our culture, that people from the lake do not fear each other's nakedness, which is true, and that actually speaks a lot to culture and even dealing with issues of sexuality. That when you go to the lake, sometimes talking about sex and sexuality is not a sham, as it would be said in Central Kenya. There are things that I normally say that people told me if I said in Central Kenya I wouldn't be elected, but which in Roland is not a shock, because we are fairly open-minded around sex and sexual issues, because our culture is very laden with sex. If you want to plant, a planting season, you must have sex. I don't know, you do what, you must have sex. We are a very sexualized community. But that doesn't mean we are promiscuous. It just means that we recognize the centrality of sex in life, and we don't shy away about it. And that's why sometimes then I think it's a tragedy that we are moving away from our culture, which allowed discussions around issues of sex and sexuality. And maybe what has died in terms of culture is that if you look at the very traditional culture, there was something called Siwindenyiri, which was the hut of the girls, where the girls stayed with their grandparents. The girls didn't stay with their fathers and mothers in the same house, but they stayed with their grandparents, who then ensured they had their physical security, that they were not out looking for boys when they had their grandmother. But the other thing that the grandmothers did was to actually teach sexual and reproductive issues to the girls. And it's just that we don't have the time, but I would have sung for you a song, a cultural song that says, when I was young and I was growing up in my grandmother's hut, we were taught very many things, including the fact that if you play with boys, you will get harmed. And they had a lot of education and issues around sex and sex education. And what has happened over time is these cultural frameworks have died and have collapsed. There is no longer any Siwindenyiri, but we do not have an alternative. And this alternative is what we are trying to get into schools. And our religious sector is so opposed to it. And they are so opposed to it because we have not gotten to a roundtable discussion involving policy makers, involving the religious leaders, and involving the custodians of culture. And I think that is an important conversation that we need to have, so that people can actually then agree what would be the best way to go around it. But of course, the issue of urbanization that has made information access very, very free has also very, very significantly contributed to the issue of not only kids getting sexually active, but also issues of sexual and gender-based violence. And if you look at, for instance, the urban slums, that people, the way people live, such close proximity to each other, no safety measures. You'll find that you have one toilet that is shared within, 7,000 households are sharing one toilet, both men and women. If you go to the toilet at night, I used to deal with such cases when I was at Credo, and you find that there's somebody who's just eyeing this girl every single day. And then when they time you and they know maybe you go to the toilet at this time of the night, then they time you and rape you there. Very recently, we had an unfortunate case in my constituency, which also has to do with the issue of urbanization, because we have a lot of people who come and who have now moved to my constituency, which is largely supposed to be a rural constituency, but now it's growing more cosmopolitan because of trade. And so this guy, who is not a local, because people don't know him, is coming to trade, and he has actually noted that this girl has no mother. The father goes fishing in the night, and so the girl remains with small kids in the night. So he went in, broke into the home, pulled out the girl, raped the girl, killed the girl, then returned her back in the house and lay her down there very nicely and left her there. So all those factors have made it very, very easy. I think the other challenge we are not doing is that we are not beefing up our security just as fast as also population growth, because also urbanization, population growth, and our services are not being increased to match the population growth. I want to apologize that I have to leave because I have another engagement, but I just wanted to bring to attention that we have 2 bills in Parliament that are actually 3 bills that I can see in Parliament that are dealing with different aspects of children's rights. One, I have a bill, the Child Justice Bill. I think you had mentioned about the Assisted Reproduction Technologies Bill that people tend to know more about, because it's trying to help women who don't have children to get children. But I also have a Child Justice Bill that I have sponsored, and the Child Justice Bill looks at children who are in conflict with the law and trying to find better ways of handling children who are in conflict with the law, introducing concept of diversion and psychosocial support for children who are in conflict with the law. Honorable Lillian Gogo has also brought the Children Act, which would then repeal the Children's Bill, which would repeal the current Children Act. And the main aim of that bill is to ensure that that the Children Act conforms with the Constitution. For instance, the Constitution now provides for protection of children born out of lawful wedlock, but the Children Act seems to allow, kind of discriminate. So what we are doing is, what she is doing by the bill, is to make sure that there's harmonization. And maybe the other issue that we are hopefully doing with the children, the Child Justice Bill, is also looking at the age of criminal responsibility. And then we also have proposed amendments to the Sexual Offences Act to deal with some of the issues that we are talking about. I wish I was more available to respond to some of the issues that may be arising, but I'm available. Of course, I'm always at hand to work with LSK when we are not occupying Parliament. And we are always at hand to work with you on issues to do with, especially on issues to do with children and women. But I do a lot of mainstreaming human rights and other cross-cutting issues in legislation, so I'm at hand to work with you should the need arise. And thank you and for doing this good job.
Thank you very much, Madam Senior. First, now let's allow the legislator to go and legislate.
Thank you.
We will follow through on the bill tracker,
Yes.
on the current bills. We thank you very much for your time. My colleague, Moral follows you ardently and keep it consistent.
Thank you.
We hear approach you later on for your number for further discussion.
You had a question?
Yes, allow me to take you to plenary to show me as a brief
so much, Honorable Mili and Mora and Odongo. Work well done. Honorable Mili, I serve in the Child Law Practitioners Committee of the Law Society of Kenya. And I remember we had engaged you on a need to have a conversation, one of the, on the ART bill. And one of our main considerations was the question whether we needed to match the bill at the Parliament, National Assembly, and at the Senate. Whether that is a likelihood. Now that the budget involved public participation, committee stage reading, we thought that that was a very intense conversation we needed to have. I must say that LSK was, we did not know about the public participation. In fact, only one of our colleagues, senior executive law, happened to sit at the public participation. So I want to know your mind on the ART now that it is brought back to the floor house. What do we anticipate? How far do we go with that bill that is much needed in the country? I see that you did not mention that, but I had hoped to hear you talk about the ART bill.
Thank you. Thank you. Maybe I'll speak to two bills. We have the Assisted Reproduction Technologies Bill, which is, I've seen it will be coming in the order paper on Thursday. And I've also brought the Reproductive Healthcare Bill. So there are two bills. There's Reproductive Healthcare Bill, and also there's another Reproductive Healthcare Bill by Senator Susan Kihika. Mine, in terms of content, is a bit different from Kihika's, so in terms of approach, because it takes a life cycle approach. It looks at the reproductive cycle from conception to death. And then it also takes a gender perspective. And the reason I took that approach is because whenever we talk about reproductive health care, people think reproductive health care is about abortion. It's not about abortion. It's about challenges that we as women face that are peculiar to us as women that men don't go through. And it is about peculiar challenges that men go through that we don't go through. Like erectile dysfunction. I don't have erectile dysfunction, but men have erectile dysfunction. We don't talk about such issues. I saw Dr. Stella Nyanzi yesterday wrote about the fact that she has onset of menopause when she's just starting her campaigns. She's never confronted it. And she's saying, I'm getting hot flashes. Not all women get hot flashes. Maybe for some people it's, different things that go on. But then we have stigmatized even menopause, which is a normal process. It's like you want to tell a woman now that you are menopausal. Don't talk where people are talking. Your sell-by date is gone. Sell-by date for what? Because of sex. Please. I mean, those are the things that we must be talking about. Earlier we were talking about children. But then the issues of reproduction and sex also affect us as adults. And we made sex look like it's, I don't know what it is. It's like some mongrel, some organ that we cannot touch or feel, yet everybody is touching it and feeling it. You know, we're so hypocritical about issues of sex. So we must talk about things that affect us, our reproduction, and the challenges both men and women face. The cancers that come around that affect men more than women because of reproduction, the issues that are likely to affect women more than men because of reproduction. Those are issues addressed in my bill, my reproductive health care bill. But then it also talks about issues that we've been talking about here, like age-appropriate sex education in schools. But because Honorable Susan Kihika already has a bill, my proposal, which I've even told Parliament, is that I'm going to let go of my bill, my reproductive health care bill, but I am pushing my amendments, my proposed amendments to the Kihika bill, but then also listening to the concerns that have emanated from different sectors, including the religious sector. We are going to work to make sure that what the Kihika bill has is what is in the Constitution and not any other thing. I know we must get a balance. We have people who are far right and far left, but we must get a balance to make sure that we deal with issues of reproductive health care. But the Assisted Reproduction Technologies Bill is an aspect of reproduction, but doesn't deal comprehensively about the reproduction. I decided in the last parliament to bring it as a standalone bill because of the fight over reproductive health care. As people, and I'll give you as my best example, at the point I was bringing this bill, I was considering having a child through assisted reproduction. It's already too late for me. I'm not going to have a child through assisted reproduction while I'm waiting for the bill. I don't want it to be late for somebody else. And I'm saying it's too late not because I can't, but because I'm also thinking, at my age, I have a child. By the time they are 10, how old am I? Am I the grandmother or the mother? So I'm not gonna put a child through that, very consciously. So I'm thinking about the child much more than I'm thinking of me. I can still have a child through assisted reproduction, but I've decided, because I said I'm giving myself a deadline of last November, and I made that decision that I will not have a child through assisted reproduction. But I still want to help those who want to have children, and we need a legal framework so that we don't have a woman or man having a child through assisted reproduction, and then you have to go to court for the court to allow you to adopt your own child. It's actually nonsensical. So we must find a legal framework to allow me to be able to carry my own child, and upon delivery it's my child, or to let somebody else carry my child, and upon delivery it is still my child, so that I don't go through all this drama and go into court. It's also a bit discriminatory. A woman who just has a child doesn't have to go to court for the child to be declared. But because I'm struggling to have a child, I have to go to court for the court to declare for me that I've had a child. So yeah, there are actually 3 bills. Reproductive health care by Susan Kihika, one by me, and then assisted reproduction technology. So I am killing my reproductive health care bill and transferring it to Kihika. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I trust that was satisfactory. As the application answers for you to...
Thank you.
Back to Mr. Kabata to follow through on the other issues as we move over to right of the child to be heard.
Oh, thank you so much. I hope we are still connected with Mrs. Mwadime, Ms. Muma, and Victoria. There was a follow-up question that we had placed before you a while back. Just in addition to that, as you respond, Ms. Muma, now that you are a representative of the judiciary, what are the mechanisms that the judiciary is undertaking in order to enhance capacity building for judicial officers in how they resolve issues that touch on the rights of the child who are in conflict with the law?
First of all, what I'll actually say about that, it's been quite a ride for the judiciary, especially noting that there's so much that has changed with regards to children since the inception of the new constitution. There's been a lot of capacity building, of course, through JTI. However, I know of quite a number of organizations that have partnered with the judiciary because, as we all know, the judiciary is very understanding, and as has been always being revisited. So we have never had enough funds to probably also initiate our own trainings satisfactorily. So what has been happening ideally has been so many organizations that have an interest in a specific thing partner with the judiciary and train them on that specific matter. So I can say for sure that there's been a lot of capacity building for magistrates and judges here and there. But I think the challenge has also been just the same thing that we usually go through with the police, that you train this person here because, you know, like in Milimani, for instance, we have children's courts. So you train magistrates here, then after 2 or 3 years, they've been transferred somewhere else, and they're going to perform duties other than children's court's duties. So it becomes like your training literally almost goes down the drain, because now the next magistrate who probably comes in, or the next judge who comes in, doesn't have that information. So it's more like, but I can say for sure, courts like Milimani have really embraced a lot. They've been trained a lot. I think they're very lucky, especially with organizations such as IDLO has really come through for the judiciary, like in a big, big way. And I can say the American Embassy has also come through for us. The Dutch Embassy has also come through for the judiciary as well. We have had a couple of partnerships with different organizations as well, such as the Cradle, when I think it was very active, would do the same trainings as well. But another thing that what has been the biggest issue has been whatever happens in Milimani and probably the neighboring courts, like maybe Kiambu, Thika, does not necessarily trickle down to the courts and to other counties. Like, you find that a situation where Milimani has all this information, like how a child should be treated, what are the child, because a child is a child, whether that child is being accused or that child is in conflict with the law, the child is still a child and should be treated as such, and they have rights. So you find that in those other courts outside, especially outside town, these children are not necessarily treated like children. I mean, they're handcuffed, and we all know kids are not supposed to be handcuffed. When children matters are being heard, you're supposed to clear the court. So there was this instance, I'm not going to mention the court, and it was actually my boss who'd gone to court, and she was like, no, this is a children's matter. Why isn't the court being cleared? And the advocate to the victim was like, the magistrate asked the advocate to the victim, do you see an issue? And the advocate was like, no, the court can proceed as is. And essentially, it's usually to protect the victim, but now you can see that the child they defiled each other, so it was a defilement case of both of them were actually children, so of course you have to clear the court. And they refused, and my boss decided and told the magistrate that this court is not going to proceed while it's full, because these are both children and you need to protect their integrity. So she of course allowed it to happen, that the court be cleared. Then later on, my boss was able to write to the judiciary and tell them this is what happened. And then finally, they were like, the magistrate actually apologized to my boss and said she had no idea that this actually is what is supposed to be happening. So what I'm really trying to say is, you find that like Thika Law Court has a children's court, and it's beautiful, and you find like it's literally an environment where a child is able to actually come and give the testimony in a child-friendly manner, and the magistrates who are there are very, very child-friendly as well. And that's the same to Milimani, but I feel it still doesn't trickle down very well to the other counties and the rural courts. So I think that has been one of the biggest challenges as well. And I'd say the same for the lawyers as well. You find that the lawyers in Nairobi, or the courts then the courts surrounding Nairobi have so much information, but you go to these other courts and they have no idea, like that's something that's supposed to be happening. Children are being handcuffed, children are put in the same cells with adults, and that's not supposed, and you know what happens then. I mean, children are defiled, they're abused when they're in there. So I think these are some of the things that should really trickle down, but it has, we have made a big stride, but we are still not yet there. That's what I see.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mua, for those insights. I trust my able co-host, Mr. Kabata, will have follow-up questions on that issue for you. We'll also go to the plenary shortly. Beatrice Nducha, sitting here, has a question, and on that note, allow me to loop in Ms. Mwadime and ask a question related to diversion and alternative measures. We know that there is very serious congestion in prisons, because we also must discuss then the tail end of children in conflict with the law, because this question invariably introduces children in conflict with the law from teenage pregnancies onwards then. We know very well that because of lack of facilities, there is the mixing of juveniles with the main population in prisons. Furthermore, there is the overcrowding in itself. For instance, if you go to industrial area police, remand prison rather, this is an outstanding issue. Whereas you're aware that, for instance, the ODPP has the diversion policy. Is there anything that you're doing in your capacity, or perhaps in conjunction with the judiciary, to bring to light or to bring to fore or to address this issue, and perhaps through diversion or alternative measures, Ms. Modime?
Thank you so much
Yes.
for the question. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you very clearly. Thank you.
Yes, so we have been working very closely with not only the judiciary but also the police and the prisons. And definitely it's a very huge gap in terms of what is in policy and whatever is in practice on the ground. And as Ms. Muma has said earlier, it is always very, it's really disheartening to go to a police station or a prison and find that children have been mixed together with adult offenders. And unfortunately for Kenya, we have very few postal institutions and remand homes, and even then, it's worrying when you see the police swoops, the routine police swoops happening. Children are collected. Some of them are national citizens, others are migrants, and you find them put in one particular cell where there are also remandees in there, adults. So in most instances during our rounds, which are monitoring rounds, we normally flag out those particular issues. We ensure that the children that are in conflict with the law are placed differently, are placed in a different cell or a different holding facility, as opposed to being mixed with other adult offenders. And the other thing that we normally do is watching brief, especially to ensure that we have matters relating to children dispensed with as soon as possible without delay. Because then again, there's the issue about the mental state of the child while this particular issue is dragging, and not only the offender but also the victim. So, and also the issue about the interpretation services in case the same are needed. So those are mainly the issues that KNCHR has been able to partner with the juvenile justice system to be able to ensure that the rights of the child, both for the victim and the offender, are respected.
Okay.
And back to you.
Thank you very much for those insights. Mr. Nagata?
Victoria, are you still on? Victoria?
Yes, I'm still here.
There's this potential that juveniles who come into contact with the law, that means those who are find themselves on the wrong side of the law, after they have undergone the pre-trial, or even if it is the full trial period, if they are not afforded the luxury of some form of bail or excluded from those who are remanded and or are of an adult age, the higher propensity is that they usually recur into criminality. So that the larger conversation about separating juveniles from those who are of age becomes of great necessity and actionable. So give us your views on this aspect.
I agree with that view. It's not a secret that when people get integrated, they talk and they share ideas and they share their experiences. And so it's to be expected that if children are locked up with adults, these adults are going to pass on values to them, ideas, even the wrong ideas and wrong information, such that by the time the children are coming out, even if it's just pre-trial, they're not the same children who came in. And the thing with children, when they come to conflict with the law, we have to remember that our main aim is to ensure that we are able to integrate them back into the society. So that we aim not to bring them back in. And so it's important how we teach them when they come in. And like what the other panelists have mentioned, it's important that they are separated. They are not locked up together with the adults, not just for their protection, but also so that we protect their innocence, so to speak. And at the end of the day, we have to look at what's the best interest of this child. Like one of the panelists said, these are still children, yes? They may have committed a crime, but they're still children. And so what is in their best interest for them? How do we protect them from coming back, from committing the same pitfalls? And I believe it's very possible that when they come out and they're interacting with other adults, that they're more likely to go back in. Because that's what they've been exposed to. And so we have to really protect against that. And we have to protect, even go back and even prevent children from getting there in the first place. Yes, back to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. To Ms. Muma, two questions. Do you see a correlation between those children who are put, or rather who benefit from diversion and alternative measures, and them being able to prove their innocence in some of these offenses? And together with that, and out of curiosity, where did the children go upon conviction from your experience? Then we'll come to Ms. Beatrice Mutai with a question from the plenary.
First of all, I'd actually just like to tell Kabata something. A child in conflict with the law is a child who's probably committed a crime. A child in contact with the law could be even a victim of, say, defilement, or who's come to court for matters, care and protection, etc. So that's a child. So all of them are children in contact with the law. But just to say, because we don't say kids are accused, so they are in conflict with the law. That's how we separate them. So now, you just, Odongo.
Do you need me to recap?
You asked about diversion.
Yes.
I feel that actually diversion, which is actually being brought in the children's bill, is going to be, one of the things is, we really need to, and I'd quote Kavulavu, I don't know if you guys know him, he's from ICJ, and he's been very, very passionate about decriminalizing petty offenses. And this is one of the things that, of course, would really benefit the children, because more and more children go into the system, they never come out the same, And you find that the society, first of all, will stigmatize these children, their parents don't want them, and that really pushes them back into the system. That's why you find that most of the kids who have actually been in conflict with the law for such petty offenses will always recur and go back into the system because of even the stigma that the community pushes towards them, their family. And now this also brings about the aspect of what is called psychosocial support. You find like in the system, we don't have enough facilities, we don't have enough human resource. Psychosocial support has still not been embraced as it should be, like in terms of like what Millie was just saying. If two children are having sex, these are not children who should be in prison, because that means they're actually criminalizing sex. These are children who need to undergo psychosocial support. They need care and protection. They need to know why, we need to know why they're doing that, and they need to know why they're probably doing something wrong. So it's all about explaining to them, speaking to them, and counseling them to let them know where they are, why they're going wrong where they are. So I feel that matters diversion will actually help, especially minor offenses. We'll see no kids passing through the justice system. Children are really traumatized while going through the justice system, and it's not good. Like even these children who go, it doesn't matter whether they're in conflict or in contact with the law, they're both traumatized, and you should find a child, they shake, and it just really changes them as a person, because we have to know that a child is still a child. It doesn't matter whether this child is an immigrant first of all, the first thing we always need to note is this is still a child. And I feel that it will also, of course, reduce the backlog in terms of most of these matters will be sorted out by the police, the parents, the victim, plus of course a children's officer will always be present to ensure that these matters are resolved in the best interest of the child. So this will just save the kids from the justice system. It will save them from the having to be stigmatized by the community, and it will also just, it will, I think, preserve their innocence to being kids. Because even by the time that child is going through court, it doesn't matter whether it's been 24 hours, that child being in a cell, and most often than not, you find most of our police stations don't even have proper facilities. They don't have the child protection units. I can just mention a few of them that actually have. We have Buruburu. I think Buruburu has a child protection unit. Kasarani has one. What Musaida does, Musaida refers all the kids to Pangani, because Pangani doesn't necessarily have a child protection unit, but it has a very big cell that they have actually just now designated to children only. Kamkunji also hosts a lot of kids, and Kilimani also has a child protection unit. So I mean, you can see it's very, very few police stations that have child protection units. So you can imagine in between that police station, that these other police stations that probably don't have child protection units, that means the child will still be put with an adult, and the next thing you know, by the time this child gets to court the next day, there's so much that has happened. Even to you adults, when somebody is arrested over the weekend for, I mean, they're literally calling insistently, and there's so many texts on our legal WhatsApp groups for this person to be released. Why? Because of whatever they go through, I mean, the trauma. So you can imagine what really happens to a child when they go through this. And one other thing that I actually, I forgot to mention in terms of the judiciary is that the national, we call it the NCAJ, which is the National Council on Administrative Justice, has a special task force on children matters. And I think this has been a task force that it was led by Justice Comey. And it did like so much in terms of children matters, because they tried to go around the whole country just to see, like, and to train and to probably just see the conditions for the conditions in the courts and how children are treated, and if they knew at least just a few of the things that how children are supposed to be treated in the justice system. So it was all about like capacity building and policy development on diversion and matters, probably like plea bargaining, and just court visits from the committee members just to see how children are handled in different courts. Then another thing was, I think the introduction of the Children's Service Week has really assisted so much to making the matters expeditious in terms of trial for the children's cases. And we know, I think it happens like in November, and it's something that has been embraced, and we have seen the backlog in the children's courts really go down because most of, like, they bring actors from different justice sectors who come and contribute and just bring about the best practices. Then another thing that I've mentioned is we've seen that CUCs the CUCs are the Court Users Committee, but for the children we have the Children Court Users Committee, where we have all these people who deal with children. We have representatives, of course we have the judges, we have the magistrates, we have lawyers, we have prison wardens, we have children officers, we have people from the Boston institutions, all these institutions that probably the children will pass through, just so that we can have like a common, like literally one voice when we know that when a child is either in conflict or in contact with the law, what is the next step, so that we just have a uniform, probably how the child is treated from one end to the other is actually uniform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore, for those elaborate interactions. I trust Mr. Kabata will again have another follow-up for you, then we'll come over to Victoria and Maureen as we draw towards the end. Ms. Nduta?
Hello, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Odongo. You're doing a very good job with Mr. Kabata. Thank you so much. My question is on the issue of child participation in the decision-making process. Mheshimiwa Mili told us of the bill, of the public participation bill, that also includes children in the process. But my question is currently, what is being done? We have the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, General Committee number 12, Rights of the Child to be heard. So as it is as at right now, to what extent does our law incorporate the issue of the child's rights to be heard?
Thank you very much for that question. I'd like to throw this to either Victoria or Maureen, just to make a comment on what she has asked. And that is to do with the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, General Comment number 12, as she has identified, on the right of every child to be heard. In policy or in law, do you see this being done, or are we pontificating on issues of the rights of the child without factoring into question the very important voice of the child? Any of you can take it if you feel comfortable with it. Are we still on?
Yes.
Should
Yes.
I go ahead?
Proceed, please.
Odongo?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Yes, now public participation has been, I think it's one thing that we haven't really gotten a very good grasp when it comes to implementation of the same. It's a constitutional right, not only for adults, but for each and every Kenyan to be able to participate. Unfortunately, when it comes to executing that particular right, that is lacking in not only matters that relate to children, but also all areas that relate to legislation and policy making. And also when it comes to decisions that are made by different government institutions. Now, with regards to the child, we have, I believe, the Children's Parliament, where some of these salient issues are normally discussed, and the same voices are put together in a way that can be, easily articulated and forwarded to the Parliament for consideration. But then again, it's about questioning what exactly is the role of public participation. When the Constitution talked about public participation, how far would we go to actually ascertain that public participation has indeed taken place? Because what we find is that we have processes in the system, but not necessarily very elaborate, that will indeed take into consideration the issues that have been raised by the specific group, and in this particular, the children. I remember there is a decision by one of the high courts, I think it was either in Kilifi or Mombasa, that stated that public participation does not necessarily take away the job that our parliamentarians are supposed to be doing. So lawmaking is one of the functions of the parliament. So public participation, some of the issues raised are for consideration and not necessarily for action, as we would all envisage. That was the spirit of the Constitution. Over to you, Odongo.
Thank you very much for those insights. I want to throw it over back to Mr. Kabata to engage us a bit on Romeo and Juliet laws, because then this is the, what as the French would say, I don't know if my French is adequate, pièce de résistance on this question of children in conflict with the law.
So my question is directed to all the panelists, but let me start with Victoria. We have seemingly had a difference, or rather a disconnect, between lowering the age of consent and the interventions, the great interventions were alluded by the Honorable Millie Mabona before she left, between the linkage with lowering the age of consent and introduction of Romeo and Juliet clauses. These are clauses that permit age to age, not consent per se, but age to age sexual interactions. That is to say, if you have a 2-year age limit clause that a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old can mutually agree to have sex. And I'm making a rejoinder into what Ms. Muma has just alluded to. Sex is not an offense. And the good Justice Kimaru always likes reminding us that if these aspects of criminal law will be applied retrogressively, then most of us, if not all, will be criminal. So let me have your intervention in regards to these clauses, Romeo and Juliet clauses. Is it lowering the age of consent, or is it allowing age clauses into our Sexual Offences Act?
First of all, my opinion when it comes to lowering the age of consent is because I don't see children who engage in sex refusing to engage in sex just because it is illegal. I don't think that would be the solution. I think the age of consent should remain where it is, because it's not a question of legality or illegality. Like I say, we need to really understand why children engage in sex in the first place. So I don't think lowering or even increasing the age of consent will solve that problem. My opinion on the Romeo and Juliet clauses, again, what would be the argument? Is it that because you're saying we would make it a bit more lenient, where there's the age gap is reduced, say 2 years. So we're saying, for example, if a 16-year-old and a 18-year-old engage in sex, we would maybe not make it a crime or reduce the crime sentence. But then the question would be what? Because they have consented to it. But the reason why we have the age of consent at 18 is because we are saying these people are not mature enough to understand the consequences of engaging in sex at that age. So again, I'm reserved. I'm opposed to it. I think the legality is not the issue. I think that is not getting to the root of the issue. I think we should get to understand these children and deal with it from the family level. Is it education? Is it that they are not getting the mentorship and the counseling that they deserve or they need rather? I think our approach should be that way, as opposed to me focusing on the laws. The laws are there, it's not working. So what else can we do? Who can we engage? Is it that the government needs to step up? Or is it the family? Is it the schools? How else can we approach this problem and find a solution?
The quagmire is on consent, so that the legal requirement for consent becomes the age. When you introduce the Romeo clause, it then means that legally, if you are within that clause regiment, then your consent is allowed. So if you are a young male individual of 19 years and she is a young female individual of say 17 years, that is permissible. That is what the Romeo and Juliet clause is all about. But then there is that larger outcome, for instance, that comes with, let's say, pregnancy, so that the 19-year-old and the 17-year-old can conceive and have a baby, and then they can be considered for all purposes, adults, and that they can be able to access safe reproductive health infrastructure, like prenatal care. They can access maternity structures without the necessity of the social stigma that comes with the unlawfulness. So that the legal criteria we are talking about is consent. If 19 years and 17 years consent is there. That's the dialogue that we are framing around the Romeo and Juliet clauses.
Yeah. And further to that, and thanks for that insight, I'm seeing Ms. Lavina Olwatch, a long-time practitioner of children law, is rendering her opinion on the Facebook comments, and it ties to this, and she says that she does not feel that children have the right to consent, mutual or otherwise. So as you answer to the follow-up by Mr. Kabata, how does that intersect? Because if we are to look at the law in its traditional sense, children do not have the mind to, the forthwith mind to say so in the logical sense, to give their consent to certain particular issues, and that's why then there is laws on child protection. You may proceed. Did you catch that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I get it. And I agree with those comments. Very much so. Because I don't see how a 16-year-old engaging with an 18-year-old has a better capacity to consent as opposed to a 16-year-old and a 17-year-old. You see, the issue of consent, why we need consent, is because we acknowledge that we do not have the necessary capacity, the knowledge and information to make this consent. And it's a slippery slope once we start saying, at least when they do this with this person, we can accept their consent, but when they do with this other person, we can't accept their consent. It is the same individual making a consent just to different people of different ages. And I don't see how that should be factored in. I don't think children have that understanding, that maturity that they need to make consent, regardless of who they're engaging in sex with.
Thank you very much. Ms. Muma, being that you're on a day-to-day interacting with this question and you see the application of the law, what are your comments on this issue?
First and foremost, I actually totally agree with Lavina. Children cannot give consent at all. And with regards to either the Romeo and Juliet, first of all, I don't agree that the age of consent should be lowered. Let children be children. If something happens, I think probably maybe the Romeo and Juliet, I think we need to be very, very careful, even how we will bring it into the Sexual Offences Act, because I agree with it. It makes a lot of sense. It probably also gives us this, it's kind of, how do I put it? It kind of agrees with what Justice Omondi envisioned, whereby if children have agreeable sex, I will never use consent on kids because kids cannot consent, but if they agree to have sex, they're not adults, but they're children, but they've agreed to have sex, it is not fine. It is okay in that they need care and protection, but they do not need to go to prison and things like that. So I feel that our drafters will need to be very, very careful while trying to bring in the Romeo and Juliet, which I agree with, but the wording will have to be very, very, very careful. Then I also feel that this will also bring it'll make, or rather give the judicial officers quite a burden, because, or rather this will actually lessen the judicial officers' burden in terms of having to, if the children come and say that they actually had agreeable sex, then of course they can be let go. But it also gives, I think it's a whole Pandora's box. So this is what I feel.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Odongo. I know I have like so many things to say, but again, it's one of those things that we really need to be careful about. My only issue, even with the Sexual Offences Act as is right now, is we have so many laws, but we need to have our guidelines first, then have our laws. We have our laws, we never have guidelines on how to implement these laws. And I remember when we were working we were trying to work on the Sexual Offences Act, and we were looking at it, and we realized the guidelines had not even been worked on. And I think it brought about so many issues, and most of the challenges we are having right now, I think would have been stopped if people looked at the guidelines first and how the implementation would be done. So I feel that even as we are going to be amending the Sexual Offences Act and probably the Children's Bill and what have you, one of the things we really need to be careful about is let's look at the guidelines. Let's how are these laws going to be implemented? Because that has always been an issue. We have beautiful laws on paper, but again, when we look at the guidelines, it makes it a bit even hard on the judicial officers. Look at even the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act right now. We have a very good law on paper, but it's very, very hard to prosecute these traffickers because of how the law is. And I don't think people realize that because they never use the guidelines first. So I agree with the Romeo and Juliet, and I think the Romeo and Juliet clause will I think it was probably after the teddy bear case, the South African teddy bear case, I think is the one that literally tries to bring out the whole Romeo and Juliet, which will probably be in our sexual offenses soon. But I still feel that we really need to work on our wording and we really need to work on our guidelines, but I don't agree that the age of consent should be lowered.
Thank you very much, and thanks for bringing into the fore the South African decision. We'll delve into that issue as we follow up. And just for those who are following the discussion, so that this is not lost to us, so that you don't think that we are discussing this in a utopian sense. Kabata and I would like to recommend, we don't want to recommend reading like our famous teachers in the school, but instead we want to invite you to watch the following 4 documentaries because they really give context to this question. And the first is that the first documentary is a very emotive one. It's set in Yemen. It's called I Am Nujum, aged 10 and divorced. That is I Am Nujum, aged 10 and divorced. It gives context largely so this question. The second documentary, or rather docu-series, is Kids Having Kids. It goes across the world and gives a multicultural perspective to the question of children in conflict with the law, but equally early teen pregnancy and early child pregnancy. The third is Lessons Unplanned, and that is followed up by the last one by Al Jazeera on their running program 101 East, the Philippines Baby Factory. And this goes on to the issue of assisted reproduction, so on and so forth. So those 4 documentaries will be of great insight. Allow me then to take us back to the plenary. There's a good gentleman with us here who would like to throw in his voice into the discussion. Please favor us by introducing yourself and rendering a question to us.
Thank you very much, panelists and moderators. My name is Kuli Joshua. I have sat for a good minutes and I've been thoroughly moved by the contribution of our panelists. But now I would like to say something in regards to the Romeo and Juliet clauses vis-a-vis the concept of the argument and the discourse on reduction of the age for consent. Because I would like to ask ourselves, I invite ourselves to ask ourselves this question: who is likely to suffer the most if they are involved in teenage sex? Is it the boy or is it the girl? I pose rhetorically. Because if we say that it's okay to lower the ages to below 18 years, then the girls are doing this. Then they are behooved to leave school while the boys are continuing to study. Because of course you cannot, it's practically difficult to breastfeed while in classes. Then that's the beginning of a sober discussion. So as we engage ourselves in this discourse, as we gather our contribution and forward our contribution to parliamentarians, to the forthcoming legislative writings that are coming, as we have been told by Mheshimiwa, if we are contributing I wish and I propose to us that we look at it objectively and on a more sober note, we be pedantic about it so that we can have good way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I want to go back to Maureen and Victoria. Who is likely to suffer, and should we factor this in? Is it the boy child or the girl child, and is this relevant to the question of policy, law, and this discussion? It's again open, either of you can take it, Maureen or Victoria.
Okay, thank you, Odongo. Maybe I can just chip in on the discussions that are going on. And I say this emphatically, that let children be children. The moment we start discussing the age of consent and who should be able to engage in sexual activities below the age of 18, for instance, as Emma has said, it will be opening a Pandora's box. Because once again, if we are to say this 16-year-old and 17-year-old can engage in sexual activities, we know so well that there will be repercussions, right? We will have child who are born by fellow children. We will have children not necessarily fulfilling their right to education. We will have children who will actually suffer much when it comes to issues to do with shelter and also health to a large extent. Because whether we like it or not, some of the gaps that exist in the healthcare facilities that we have right now are the girl child friendly services. When young mothers approach, for instance, antenatal clinics or even just any other clinic for purposes of accessing reproductive healthcare facilities, the kind of treatment that they get from the healthcare workers is one of, is one of attitude. They will get this punitive attitude from the healthcare workers, or they will be dismissed in total. And mainly this is because of the stigma that is attached to bearing children when you're also a child. And the other thing that I would also like to underline is that the moment this girl child takes in, or the moment she gets pregnant, the responsibility of the couple is normally shifted to the girl automatically. It is very disturbing, but that is what is at the moment when we are talking about our culture. We made reference to that earlier on. So even before we start lowering the age limits, we need to be very deliberate. And as one of the contributants has said, we need to be very objective so that we do not necessarily put the girl child or the boy child on the line. We need to ensure that the kind of strategies that we embrace are ones that would avoid, number one, and also those that would cope with the situations as they are. And I think what we need to focus on as stakeholders is basically to focus on the best interests of the child, as opposed to addressing the issue when we know so well there are definite rights that the child also needs, and the same will be affected if we are to go ahead with that particular decision of the Romeo and Juliet, or if we are to amend the legislation so that it fits the current status as is. So I will conclude by saying, let children be children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Shortly we'll be coming to all of our contributors to have the closing word, but before that, Mr. Kabata has a commentary based on a very interesting question that has been relayed by the chat by Mr. Victor Sireni. Then from there we will move on to the closing.
Mr. Victor poses an observation. He says that it is unfortunate that the circumstances of teenage, pregnant mothers who are in conflict with the law find that they do not have the proper social services such as supervision of their pregnancy or their health as at when they are undergoing the trial, pre-trial, and post-trial cycle within the criminal infrastructure. And that of great importance is that there is no structure that ensures their mental health is taken care of during the correctional sentence being served. Victor Sirego makes that observation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bata, and Victor Sirego, well, I don't know that to say in absence or in virtual presence. Nonetheless, we want to take this opportunity to thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, learned friends and colleagues, for having lent us your ear today, for having rendered your opinions in this discussion. As you are all aware that we're going through the Legal Awareness Week 2020, which coincides with the 10-year anniversary of our Constitution. I almost ran the risk of saying the new Constitution. Well, 2010 is a long way back. Kabata was a young man, a bit slender and limited in weight. We've seen great improvement since then. Nonetheless, our objectives for this week, and particularly so for today's discussion, was to increase public awareness on child rights and justice issues. As you've seen, the way our topic was framed, that was very deliberate. Secondly, was to build capacity of advocates on child rights and child justice issues. I cannot say that we've truly built capacity, but we have created the need to know from our discussions today. And I trust we will follow up, and particularly so interact with the build tracker of the National Assembly and engage in those discussions of public participation, as Mohesh had mentioned. Emma Mumba, Maureen, and Victoria have given us insights from practice, but more so on Emma's side, from within the judiciary, Maureen's side, from the perspective of a practitioner from outside but interacting with the judiciary. Thirdly was to increase awareness on children's rights. We haven't delved extensively to that issue, but it's a question that's on form because as a society, we know that children are part of us, and continually so we must interface them into the law. There was fostering collaboration between advocates and the justice actors and child rights and justice issues. Those of us who practice on the first floor, Wilmani locals, third floor. The third floor, the Wilmani locals may know this, and across the country on various children's courts across the country. And most importantly was to identify strategies for legal and policy reforms in child justice issues. The ones that have come out very strongly, which we must then question ourselves strongly with, is reproductive rights. Together there is the question of growing children laws. Is it time for those laws to be actively applied in this country? And if so, what are the drawbacks? If there are drawbacks, then how do we circumvent those particular drawbacks? Now, the outcomes that we were looking to have in today's discussion, which again, as we introduced earlier on, we'd like to point to the Public Interest Litigation Committee's document on information and educative and communication material, was to develop and further develop a case digest on precedent-setting cases on children and the law, was to address the main questions of age of consent, access to contraceptives and sexual and reproductive health rights, and justice for children. So I trust this write-up will be coming out in not a long time that we interact further with this question. I now want to lay it over to Mr. Kabata to take closing statements from our panelists. Then we will close with a virtual meal that we want to invite you to. And we then invite Ms. Honorary Guy to give a closing one.
Maureen, Emma, and Victoria, please, in that order, you can just make your closing remarks. Maybe a minute each, if you are kind enough.
Thank you very much for the opportunity once again. And just as I finish, one thing I'd like to say is I still feel that one is we need probably more advocates to register with the judiciary scheme, just to ensure that all children who pass through the system are represented. And another thing is there's still a need to push for formal education, even in the Boston institution and correctional centers that our children go through. Because I don't see the need why a child should lose a year or 2 or 3, and yet you find like, I'd give an example such as at Kamai, which is near Kamiti. There's so many schools over there. There's even a school inside the committee where these children can still go to school. I don't see the reason why they should miss their formal education just because of a mistake they did. Then I think we also still need to encourage, even LSK should encourage other counseling centers to register with them, because I remember when I was at Cradle, we had a counselor who was registered with LSK, and in case anything was required, LSK would actually give out her number, and she helped so many victims, even in the judiciary. So I feel that LSK should probably rally up counselors, and so that we can just have enough psychosocial support, because we cannot just do with the psychosocial support that we get just from crew and probably feeder. We really need more, and probably LSK would be a point of help in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maura and Dodongo. What I will say is that in both conversations, that is the teenage pregnancies and the children in conflict with the law, everyone is needed to come on board. We will need a multi-stakeholder approach to be able to deal with both issues. And I think the question that we should be asking ourselves right now is how we can be able to leverage this national conversation into national action. Because we have policies in place, we have laws in place that speak to the issues that we are talking about right now. Unfortunately, there are gaps in terms of our institutions and also the users of the same institution. So we need united efforts to bridge the gaps that we have clearly identified. Thank you. Thank you. Over.
And finally,
over to you, Dongo.
Thank you, Maureen. Victoria?
I want to thank you so much for this opportunity that we've had today. It's been a very fruitful discussion. And my closing remarks are that children enjoy their own distinct rights, and every child deserves to enjoy the rights that are enshrined in the Children's Act and in the Constitution of Kenya, and that everyone in the society has a role to play. The government has the role to play, the society has a role to play, and even us as professionals, we have a role to play to ensure that children.
Thank you.
And after all is said and done, we think that the best interests of the child should be a primary consideration. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. From Kabata and I, we are very thankful. As they commonly say in Langata constituency, tumeshukuru sana. Wangari Kagai, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Before I give the closing remarks, I will invite Mr. Boniface Gore from Digimat Solutions to have a word and take us through an exciting opportunity that he has for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, moderators. Thank you, Wangari, for this opportunity. Yeah, my name is Boniface Gore, and I work with a company known as Digimat Solutions. Digimat Solutions has partnered with LSK to help run market and maintain the conversation about this legal awareness week. So for those of us who are online, you can follow the hashtag that now has been trending since yesterday. So the Human Solutions is helping with that. Now, in addition to that, we help enterprises and businesses to be able to be online, people to run their enterprises and services online. And today we are offering legal, what do you call it, firms, companies, could be still using Yahoo and Gmail to do official communication. And so Digital Solution is offering free domain for any company that is still using Gmail and Yahoo will be able to help you set up so that you can professionalize your services. Our booth is at the Mid-Money Locals, so please find time and visit us there. And our banners are all over social media on the handle, so you'll be able to get services from there. For more information, you can get in touch through Madam Wangare's office, and we'll be happy to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boniface. Now, for my closing remarks, I'd like to thank our moderators for the day, fellow high rollers, if you know, you know, for taking us through the theme and for the guided discussion. I'd like to thank the panelists for taking the time to join us today and for those very insightful discussions that we've held today. We'd like to thank my colleagues here who have been supporting. To thank my colleagues who are here present, providing the tech support, including the team that is providing the audiovisual services. I'd also like to thank our sponsors present among us, Digimart. I'd like to thank members of the public viewing through the live stream. And I'd like to also thank our colleagues across the country, the courts, who are offering legal aid to members of the public. So without further ado, I'd like to invite us, those of us who are present, if you can join us virtually for lunch, very good. But with that, we come to the end of day 2 of our panel discussions. Please join us again tomorrow as we tackle the evolution. Thank you very much.